So if you've owned any car for longer than 3 or 4 years, you've probably heard the term that your crank seal is leaking, especially if you're in a really hot country.
Mask on, 30 piece. Mask. Got it out the mud, we was serving peace. If you from the streets, you probably heard of me. Yeah, certainly. Catch a body broad day, shoot him in the hallway. Corner one, call away, dump his body in the lake. Go on my off day, I've been ballin' all state. Me and Brody made a play like the NCAA.
This is a throttle body, right? So inside here there's a throttle valve that opens and closes depending on what mode you're in. It connects to the manifold here. Inside the manifold, of course, there's a lot of boost pressure when you go wide open throttle. The other end of the intake sound generator connects to the back of the cabin to a speaker. So basically all it's doing is amplifying all of the sounds from inside the intake manifold to the cabin. So you get a lot of artificial noises. It's a common failure point. So what happens over time is the speaker starts leaking or it starts making some interesting sounds. It's something that we delete on our builds. So we have our blanking plates that just, go over here, and yeah, that gets rid of the ISG system. We do this for reliability because when we tune these cars with elevated boost pressures, the speakers fail a little bit faster. When you remove it, you hear more of the raw, authentic engine sound, which people prefer. Another thing that we do, if we have an engine out and the car is being tuned, is we delete the secondary air injection system. So these little plates here are the SAI delete blanking plates. They go here on the side of the intake manifold. So you've got one here and one on the other side. This is a one-way valve, so it can pump fresh oxygen into the exhaust manifold, or the side of the cylinder head even. Gases from inside the cylinder head cannot come out, so it's a one-way valve just to pump fresh oxygen in. Again, this is for emissions when the car is being manufactured and they need to get all the government approvals, not your yearly emissions test. That's not something to look for. We remove this as well because this has got 2 sensors and 2 blower motors that can fail. We've started seeing it quite a lot on the 650Ss, the MP4s, and the 675 LTs. So we get rid of that system. If you remove this system, you do have to tune the car. Fortunately, if you remove this system, the ISG system, you don't need to tune the car. It's something that can be coded out on the switch control unit gateway coding. So depending on the scope of work that the car is getting, we'll do the deletes accordingly. We pulled this engine out to address all of the leaks that it has. Now, one of the most common leak points on any McLaren is the crank seal. So I'm going to show you guys in a little bit the stock crank seal and the crank seal that we upgrade it with, which is a lifetime part. The V module is also another really common leak point. So there's seals that connect the V module to the engine block. Those seals, get a bit weaker over time. It's a 7-year-old car at the end of the day. It's going to have leaks. Crank seal, V module seals. We're doing the ISG and the SAI delete whilst the engine is out, because why not? We also found that on this example, the solenoid actuator valve block was leaking as well. This little valve block on the side of the gearbox, it selects the gears basically, right? So it switches between the shafts on the gearbox. We're also going to be upgrading the spark plugs to new stock spark plugs and upgrading the ignition coils to GTR coils. I think that's all that comes to mind at the moment. That's all we do for reliability, and for performance, again, clients like, whilst the engine's out, why not? Why don't we upgrade it? So we took the ECU out, sent it to USA. We are going to put our M-tuner suite onto there and do a stage 2 tune. So that's downpipes, inlets, air filters, and we will also put blow-off valves. So our blow-off valves are little spacers that go in between the turbos and the dump valves, and I think that's more or less it.
Oh God, forgive my sins, I've been really trying to win, yeah. I keep a cool killer look, my be mad cause I don't grin, yeah. Only put me over trying to profile. They can't catch me, I'ma keep the dough right at the dope house.
So if you've owned any car for longer than 3 or 4 years, you've probably heard the term that your crank seal is leaking. Especially if you're in a really hot country. McLarens are notorious for crank seal leaks. Usually it's the rear crank seal. Engines usually have a front main crank seal and the rear crank seal. Now, On a stock McLaren, the crank seal looks a little bit like this. So this is a stock crank seal from a McLaren 720S. This is the same crank seal they use on all of the McLarens. So as you can see, it's just basically a rubber flange, right? Nothing really special to it. This, as it ages, it gets weak, right? And instead of keeping the oil on this side, which is within the engine, it lets the oil seep through and leak out the crankcase. Now, this crank seal is the rear main crank seal. It's sandwiched between the engine and the gearbox. So if you need to change this, you need to remove your engine, remove your gearbox, and then change this seal. It's got a lifespan of around 4 to 5 years. I've not yet seen one that exceeds 4 to 5 years. We actually upgrade it, right? So it's another one of the things that when we're working on these engines, we change for an upgraded part that's going to be more reliable. Now, I want to show you this. This is a McLaren crank seal, and this is the front main crank seal. Now, the front main crank seal on a McLaren never leaks. We have done 0 in around five or 6 years we've been working on McLarens. We've never replaced the front main crank seal. I wonder why that is. Why does the front main crank seal not leak and the rear main crank seal leaks? The front main crank seal has a spring inside it. This spring goes behind the rubber flange and it keeps constant tension on the crank seal, right? So this is why it doesn't actually leak. So we obviously, looked into that a little bit, and we tried to see if we can also get constant tension rear main crank seal so we can stop them leaking. Well, we did. Unfortunately, the logical thing would be to fit the front main crank seal to the rear main crank, right? But they are different sizes. You can see this is the rear main crank seal size, and this is the front main. The front main one is smaller, so you can't just put that on the rear. What we did instead, we had the crank seals made up for us through our suppliers, and you can see it's a constant tension seal. It's got a little spring inside it, which is a lot thicker than the front main crank seal. This is a lifetime part, so we've not had a single McLaren in the past 4 years, 5 years that has had any of these leaking. Sometimes with the older seals, when we were installing them, even if it was a fresh seal, you'd start the engine up and it would be leaking. It is just because the design of the seal is not that great. So we do upgrade the rear main crank seal, so it is a lifetime part that doesn't leak. I told you, it's so good. So this is the clutch breather here. Now every McLaren after 2022 comes with one of these stock. When you don't have one of these, what happens is when the gearbox oil gets really hot, the clutch oil, it expands and it comes out of this hole, right? Basically, clutch oil needs to be able to expand and correct because it aerates, right? You've got a clutch basket in there that's spinning, many RPM. So when that spins, it aerates the oil. When it aerates the oil, it expands. When it expands, it needs to be able to breathe. So on a stock gearbox or a pre-2022 McLaren gearbox, you've got a little helmet here that looks like this, right? It lets the air come out and it lets it pull air back in. But unfortunately, the gearbox oil expands so much that it starts leaking from there, right? And once it leaks, obviously it can't go back inside the gearbox. So what happens then, if enough oil leaks out, you've got an air brake deploy valve here in the gearbox, right? And it sits pretty high up. So this is the connector for the air brake deploy valve. All it is it's an oil pump. Well, the oil pump is elsewhere in the gearbox, but it's solenoids. So it sends oil to the air brake and it pulls oil from the air brake, right? So it pulls and it pushes oil. What happens is, because this is so high, the fill point for the air brake actuator valve is pretty high. It sits around here. So if you, over time, as oil leaks out from the clutch breather and drains, down the side of the gearbox, you lose enough oil that you get an airlock inside the air brake. We've showed this off before, and it's a really easy way to check to see if you've got an air brake airlock or not. But that also causes air brake faults down the line. So If you've got the engine out, again, install a clutch breather so you don't have any air brake faults. What this does is when the clutch oil expands, the air rate, you know, it comes out here, it goes into this little catch can, which holds probably about, not much, probably about 100 mil, 100, 200 milliliters. Not a whole lot, but just enough so that when it's got a room to expand, and after, you know, it cools down again or it unaerates, it drains back into the gearbox. So you're never losing clutch oil. Whereas on the stock setup or a pre-22 McLaren, you're actually losing clutch oil over time. Not only is it a leak, a fire hazard, it also causes air brake issues down the line. We're going to change the SAV gasket on this. One of the things that I recommend doing whilst you have the SAV block off is clean all of the metal debris on the solenoids. So the solenoids are obviously magnetic, so any metallic contaminants that, you know, build up inside the gearbox, they get stuck to the solenoid actuators. The diff does have a metal oil filter inside, but still, you still get a little bit of build up, you know, on the SAV. So when you have this off, you should do a nice job of cleaning all of this debris off. You can see here as well, a little bit of metal. And that keeps the valve assembly nice and free so it can, you know, actuate the gears. On some older cars, as they age, you get gear shift selection errors just because of the amount of build-up of metal swarf that happens on the SAV. But yeah, we're now going to clean this up, put a new gasket into there, if I ever get this open, and well, I believe then that will help. It's a crush gasket, so it is a one-time use part, so if you ever have the SAV module off, you do need to replace the gasket. So anytime you see, you know, something like this on a gasket, it means it's a crush gasket. So once it's been crushed, it does need to be replaced. This engine has now had majority of its upgrades installed. Coil packs upgraded, new spark plugs, SCI deleted, ISG deleted, all of the leaks that it had addressed. The cam covers were also leaking, so we changed both of the cam covers. What else? We retorqued the crank hub bolt to 300 Newton meters. We installed a clutch catch can. We were going to do a clutch oil service. We obviously addressed the SAV leak as well. We've installed billet blow-off valves as part of our stage 2. It's also going to get turbo inlets, downpipes. I think I got everything, right? This is 300, okay? So one of the things that we also do on the McLaren is always check the torque spec of the crank hub bolt. We've been finding more and more that stage 2 cars are starting to slip the crank hubs as well. And obviously we do have a crank hub fix, but if it's an engine that we've pulled out, we check the crank hub torque spec anyway, just as a precautionary measure. Right, let's check it. This is locked here.
Just
stop. It didn't click?
no.
There you go. There you go. So, crank hub torque spec, 300 Newton meters. Obviously you could see that this one was loose. Just another thing to check whilst you have your engine out on your McLaren.